Hi, I'm Reverend Sarah BOWEN, an animal chaplain and interspecies minister. The folks at Spiritual Directors International have asked me to share a little bit with you about my 4-part webinar on interspecies companionship, honoring animal lives and healing human hearts. And so I'm going to answer today in this video a couple of questions that I often get asked. First, what is an animal chaplain? Second, what are animal chaplaincy skills and why might I need them as a spiritual director or a clergy member or someone who's in a leadership role in a spiritual community or religious community? And then what are we going to cover in the webinar? As I define animal chaplain, I support all sentient beings, regardless of their species or their belief system. And what that means is a couple of things. The first is to consider the spiritual lives of animals. Do they have needs like we do for connection with a higher power, with something greater than themselves? The second is to consider the human-animal bond. If we're living with an animal in our home, which many of us are, 67% of homes in the US and 57% worldwide are interspecies. So we have decisions that we need to make about how to have wellness for animals, how to have connection with animals. What do we do when they're ill and we need to make decisions on their behalf? And what do we do when they pass away? How do we survive what happens with grief and loss that's often disenfranchised in our societies because the loss is not human? Beyond that, what about the animals beyond our home? As an animal chaplain, I help support them as well, advocating for wildlife and species that are going extinct, getting involved in messy conversations about planetary ethics and what we can do to help restore habitats and make sure that we're preserving not only nature as an abstract form, but all of the beings who live in this thing that we call nature. So why might you be interested in learning some animal chaplaincy skills? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. If you're companioning others, you may be companioning people who are companioning animals. So they have questions about what to do when an animal is ill or when an animal dies, or what I like to call sacred sendoffs. They also have a unique ability to do meditation, mindfulness, different spiritual practices that are interspecies. What happens when we meditate with dogs? What happens when we listen to kirtan with cats? What happens when we do qigong with goats? And we'll be doing a little bit of that in the webinar. What can we do to make sure that when we talk about oneness and we talk about wholeness and we talk about interconnectedness in spiritual or religious communities, that we really mean what we're saying? How do we make sure that we're honoring that interconnectedness? What is the science behind that interconnectedness? We'll be looking at some fascinating studies about intercessory prayer on behalf of other beings. We'll be looking at one study about mindfulness with canine and human companions during the pandemic and what folks found about the benefits of that. We'll also be looking at different ways that humans who don't have animals in their home can benefit from having different types of spiritual practices. There was an interesting study done recently about the mental health benefits of watching bear cams. So there are all these ways of incorporating the natural world and the beings who live in those natural spaces into our spirituality. So we'll be talking about some different techniques for doing that, not only for our own well-being and to deal with compassion fatigue and ethical fatigue and all of those kind of things, but also what can we give to the people that we work with to help them broaden and deepen and expand their spirituality. I teach at One Spirit Interfaith Seminary, and this is one of the things I often do with my students, is how can we meditate to the sound of crickets? What does that bring into our connection? What happens when we envision ourselves as trees with buds that birds might be feeding off of, nipping on the ends of our fingers? What are the ways that we can truly support beings as well beyond our individual practices? So we'll be looking at some of those as well. In each of the 4 weeks, we'll be looking at a different topic. The weeks will build on each other, but they'll also be self-contained. So you can watch them in whatever order you'd like to, catch up if you missed one of the first ones, or watch them all after we've actually completed the live webinar. The first episode, as I like to call it, is called Do Animals Have Spiritual Lives? And in that, we'll be looking at some really fascinating studies from Jane Goodall and other primatologists and neuroscientists and other wellness practitioners about what they think about the capacity for animals to have spiritual lives on their own. Do they meditate? Are they spiritual but not religious? What do we know? In our second episode, we'll talk about companioning animals and their humans. So we'll be looking at some of the research-based evidence for the spiritual, the mental wellness, the health, and the conservation benefits of human-animal bonds. We'll be talking about how to support people by engaging them with interspecies practices, how we can lead people with those, or how we can share them with others so that they can do spiritual practice that is interspecies on their own. So this session is going to be very interactive. We're going to try a lot of things. We're going to drop into our eco bodies. We're going to drop into our animality and see what we can learn from looking from different perspectives. The third episode will build on this knowledge about spiritual lives of animals and the benefits of having connections with them to consider what happens when the animals in our home become ill. How do we make difficult health decisions? How do we consider the ethics and the morals of euthanasia and other ways of end-of-life care? What do we do when an animal dies? How do we take care of a body? What are the options? We'll talk about whole family cemeteries. We'll talk about cremation, aquamation, different ways of memorializing animals. And we'll also talk about how to help ourselves and to help other people we work with survive the grief and the loss that inevitably follows losing a beloved animal companion. We'll look at some of the research there too. One study says that 93% of people who experience the loss of a pet have an impact on their lives, which conflicts with daily functioning. What can we do when people are having problems sleeping? How do we help people who are worried about what others think about them when they're sad or distraught? How do we help them have resilience? So session 3 will be jam-packed with this information as full as we can in the time allotted, and also provide a lot of resources to you and to the people that you work with on how to help people with sacred send-offs. Session 4 is called Self-Care for Animal Advocates and Earth Warriors. There are so many people these days who are concerned about animal welfare, who are concerned about climate change, who are wondering what they can do to help some of these very, very messy and complex issues. And so we're going to look at those issues. What can we do? As well as how can we support people who are having compassion fatigue, who've experienced moral injury? This happens often with vegans or vegetarians you might be companioning. What do we do about creating compassion satisfaction for people in their work? Encouraging resilience, giving them the tools to be able to do the hard work that is heartbreaking, of advocating for the planet, for habitats, for eco-spirituality in their communities? How can we help animal advocates and earth warriors and ourselves, because we may be a little bit of both of those or one of those as well, to deal with this tremendous heartbreak at a time of violence and a time of destruction of the earth, and a time where legality often impedes our work in conservation and preservation. So in the end, what I hope you'll walk away with at the end of this 4-part webinar is a lot of curiosity about how you can engage animals and the earth within your spiritual companioning process, within your practice, within your community, within the ways that you work with others, that you'll feel comfortable being able to answer questions like, do animals have souls? Or what does the Pope say about pets? I have a lot of interesting information on that particular topic in recent news. You'll be able to give them tools for dealing with heartbreak and exercises for dealing with the feelings of grief and loss, which are specific to animal loss. And hopefully you'll walk away with some tools you yourself can use to be deeper connected to wildlife around you, to any animals you might be living with, and to the planet and all of the amazing creatures that inhabit it. So I hope you'll join me for this 4-part webinar. I look forward to getting to know you and your animal companions.